Who among us doesn't
Please
need to
remind
seek
us.
forgiveness?
Go ahead.
Which, as we know, is the Ram's horn.
Shalom Uvracha, everybody. I'm Rabbi Mitch Cohen, Director of National Ramah. Thrilled to be discussing a very, very important part of the Yom Kippur service, perhaps one of the highlights of the prayers that we do every year during the High Holy Days. Today, with many of my colleagues, a number of my colleagues from the National Ramah Commission, to discuss what categories of sins that we enumerate during the Al-Chet prayer are most meaningful to us and can really encapsulate for us what our lives are all about and how to improve our lives for the future. I think the Vidui section of the Musaf of the Amidah on Yom Kippur starts with general Ashamnu, Bagadnu, these general categories which don't get into specifics. And then towards the end of that section, when we do Al-Chet Shechatanu Panecha for this and Al-Chet Shechatanu, oh God, please grant us atonement for this sin and for that sin. There are lots of different Sidurim over the generations. As it's pointed out in this Machzor, Sadia Gaon's first Sidur had listed 6 lines, and Amram Gaon's listed 12 lines, and the Rambam's Machzor listed 22 lines. We now have a Machzor with 44 lines. I've seen Machzors with many, many more lines. These are the specific, very down-to-earth things that people do to each other and to themselves. We're not talking about violating Shabbat. We're not talking about violating Kashrut. Those are a whole different series of chata'im, or sins, ben adam lemakom. These are really ben adam l'chavero, or ben adam le'atzmo, how we treat ourselves and how we treat others. And one of the most helpful exercises that I go through each year in looking through these 44 lines in the Machzor that I use is, if I had to look at 1 or 2 or 3 of these and say that really encapsulates for me what I need to improve on, what I need to better myself in the coming year, then I can really focus on that tefillah more than just mumbling through or davening through a whole series of things and then singing Ve'al Kulam. You know, it's just, to me, that's much more meaningful. So one of the first questions I want to ask all of you is, in looking at the text, Al-Chet Shechatanu Lefanecha, and just by the way, this is a double acrostic, meaning that if you look at the, after the words Al-Chet Shechatanu Lefanecha in the Hebrew, it's Ones, Imutz, Bivli, you know, Aleph, Aleph, Bet, Bet, Gimel, Gimel. So it's a double acrostic saying in every letter of the Hebrew alphabet, we could enumerate sins that we all commit. And I would just throw out there the fact that there's a beautiful line by Abraham Joshua Heschel in the margin of the Machzor Lev Shalem, which I'm using from the, just can't get it, using from the Rabbinical Assembly, which starts out, embarrassment not only precedes religious commitment, it is the touchstone of religious existence. What the world needs is a sense of embarrassment. What category of sin do you look at here which makes you embarrassed and say, that's me? That's something that I really, really need to work on in the coming year. And just to start, I would say that one of the lines that's a little bit interesting, doesn't pop out, even for those of us who know Hebrew very well. It's the 3rd line of the 2nd set, which says, Al-Chet Shechatanu Lefanecha bil latzon, lamed tzadi vav nun, latzon. From the same root is leitzan, being a clown. And the translation here is, we have sinned against you by clever cynicism. And how many of us are guilty of going through life, not always just saying, hey, that's great, that's wonderful, that's terrific, being upbeat and positive to the extent that that's natural and normal. But we're always looking for that funny remark. We're always looking for that cynical remark, which we may think is harmless and we may think is funny even. But we don't know the context in which the person was speaking to takes that. I know I'm certainly guilty of that. Whether it's because I have a position of authority or it's just who I am. When I speak to people, I need to remind myself that cynicism, skepticism, even humor sometimes is not so appropriate. And I think if I could focus on that in the coming year, I could be a better person and have better communications. So that's one thing that really works for me. Are there categories of sin that you see here on these lists that mean something to you? Anybody?
So I found one that I think this year, more than any other year, I'm noticing, and I haven't really noticed it before. On the very last one is, we have sinned against you by succumbing to confusion.
Yeah.
And this year, with so much uncertainty and such a sense of not knowing what the future holds, I worry about feeling a little paralyzed. I worry about not being able to plan and not being able to think ahead, that this feeling of confusion can sometimes be a little bit overwhelming. And I don't know that I've really felt that before. This one feels like a new one for me.
Yeah, this year, everybody's confused. The question is that a sin that you need atonement for, or is that just a condition of our lives? Is it in your power to do better, Nancy?
I think so. I think I was surprised to find it here, especially at the very end. We have sinned against you by betraying trust. Okay, that one makes sense. And we have sinned against you by succumbing to confusion. So are we doing something bad as we're confused? I'm not sure, but I'm noticing this one and thinking about how it's making me feel right now. Whereas, I don't think I would have thought about it as something so bad in the past.
Excellent point. Ami.
I would share two that I think speak out to me this year, both on the top of the second page. The first line, where we do the al-chet for siach siftotenu, where we translate here in our everyday conversations, but really the conversations of our lips that pass through us regularly. I think we're all at fault for that. We all speak, Mitch, as you were indicating a little before, whether it's sarcasm or humor or just an offhanded remark. I know that I'm guilty of that sometimes, and all the more so this year, and it works in parallel with the second line of the third set, which is lefanecha biflilut, that we've sinned against each other by rashly judging others. I don't know about you, but when I go out and see people, are they wearing masks? Are they not wearing masks? Where are they sitting? What are they doing? Are they choosing to eat out? Are they choosing not to eat out? I think there are definitely words that pass through my lips on a daily basis that are judging others perhaps unfairly, this year all the more so.
Who else? Yeah, Ariel.
I have a slightly different point to make, which is that now that I'm looking at this for the first time in a year, it's kind of interesting to see what two things are grouped into the same sort of stanza. And I'm trying to figure out, some of them have more obvious connections to each other than others. But just looking at the translation, for example, on the main page, it says, we have sinned against you by the way we do business, and we have sinned against you in our eating and drinking, which to me is an example of, I'm not immediately sure why those two things are being grouped together and, the order in which they're being grouped, but it makes me think more about, the meaning behind it and try to draw those connections between certain things that don't seem obvious to me at first.
It's a great point, because so much of the juxtaposition of prayer is intentional by the rabbis when they put these together. In this case, it might just be the mem, masal matan and ma'achal mishteh, but you could certainly find a lot of connections between what we eat and consume and how we do business. Dave.
Yeah, I think the one that I find surprising and devastating every year is on this. I think on the second page here in the left shalem, it says that we've sinned against you knowingly. And I like to think that all of my sins were accidents and were mistakes. But you
just have to be more careful and everything would be okay.
Right. But it causes me to pause and say, there are times where even in the moment, I could say to myself, I could be doing this better than the choice I'm making. The choice to stay in bed and miss something. The choice to take a shortcut. And I think it's a painful reminder that we're not just inadvertent sinners, but sometimes deliberate. And that's a hard pill to swallow, but one that I think is an important area to reflect on. And I'm not even talking about big stuff, but even the little stuff that we could do better.
It's also something that we have more control over than the ones that we do inadvertently. One could argue. Yeah, Jeff.
So with so much of us spending more time at home, we're reverting to social media. And I think that the line that really struck me is, we have sinned against you through foul speech, and we have sinned against you through foolish talk. And whether you're doing it yourself or you're promoting somebody else's page or liking somebody else's page, I mean, Facebook groups have started shutting down comments to prevent hate speech and to prevent things that could be. And you need to be not only conscious of what you do, but somebody could take your thing and turn it against you or turn it against somebody else. So the foul speech and the foolish talk are actually interesting put together, and it may not even be deliberate. Talk about context. Yeah. You always say there's no tone in a text or in an email or something. How about in a social media post, which if you're spending, 8, 10, 12, 18 more hours a day internal and on there, that it's coming up even more.
It's a great point. It's almost like all the sins that have to do with speech, they get amplified so much more now with social media than the rabbis could possibly imagine.
And stay present.
Exactly. Erez.
The one that really stuck out to me was kind of in a similar vein as Dave's. Mine was, where did it go? We have sinned against you through empty promises. And I've been thinking a lot about just timing and how I historically have been late to a lot of things, just late to different plans that I make, sometimes late to the office. And so in this time of quarantine, I'm really starting to audit my time more and think about waking up earlier, being more on the schedule for my eating and exercise. And though I'm not really making plans with people because of social distancing, quarantine, isolation, all those things, definitely trying to be more reliable when it comes to any conversation or any responsibilities I have. So that's definitely a goal of mine in the upcoming year, to follow through with all those commitments that I make.
A great point. I want to thank you for all your comments. I think for all of you listening to this Kavanot Ramah project right now, the point here, I think, is that when we get to a prayer like Al Chet, and most prayers, is that we get so much more by zooming in and focusing on one phrase, one word, one line, and thinking about how that can really be meaningful to our lives. And if we can fulfill that during these high holiday period, we can really get a much greater sense of depth of prayer, depth of meaning, and depth of self-improvement for the coming year. Thanks everybody for a really interesting discussion. Toda rabah.